Overlord Volume 5 Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Those Who Pick Up, Those Who Are Picked Up. Part 1. Middle Fire Month, 8th month, 26th, day 15, 27. After sending the old lady home, Sebas continued on to his original destination. He came to a long stretch of wall. 3 towers, each 5 stories tall, rose from within those walls. Their height was made even more imposing by the fact that they were the tallest buildings around. These towers were surrounded by several long and narrow 2-story buildings. This was the headquarters of the kingdom's Magicians Guild. They need ample space for the development of new spells and the training of arcane magic casters. The reason why they could afford all this land despite having practically no national support was probably due to their manufacture and sale of magic items. After walking a little further, he saw a sturdy gate. The latticed gate yawned open, and on either side of it were several armed guards, stationed near the 2-story buildings. The guards did not obstruct Sebas, although they quickly looked him over and he passed through the gate. There was a gently sloping wide staircase before him, and a set of doors which opened into a distinguished-looking detached house. Naturally, these doors were open to welcome visitors. Upon entering, he found himself in a small entrance hall, with the building's lobby before him. A number of magical chandeliers hung down from the high ceiling of the latter room. On the right was a guest lounge that contained a sofa and several other pieces of furniture. There were magic casters conversing within. On the left was a notice board. Several people were studying it in earnest. Some wore robes and looked like arcane magic casters, while others seemed to be adventurers. There was a counter in the innermost reaches of the hall, and there were several young men and women seated behind it. All of them wore robes, and they had badges on the chests which matched the symbol he had seen while entering the building. On either side of the counter stood a pair of skinny wooden dolls, of the kind used for sketching. They were the size of actual humans and they had no facial features, wood golems, in other words. Apparently, they were being used as sentries. The fact that they had not posted any human sentries inside must have been pride on the part of the Magicians Guild, the outside sentries notwithstanding. Sebas' shoes pounded out a steady beat as he approached the counter. The young man at the counter noticed Sebas and greeted him with a look. Sebas nodded in return. He was a frequent customer here, so both of them were familiar with each other. "Welcome to the Magicians Guild, Sebas-sama. How may I help you today?" "Yes, I'd like to buy a spell scroll. May I consult the usual list?" "Certainly." The youth quickly brought a large tome to the counter. He must have gotten it ready when he noticed Sebas approaching. The pages of the book were made of high-quality paper that was thin and white as snow, while its cover was made of leather. The overall article was of exquisite construction. The letters upon the cover were imprinted in gold, and the cost of this book alone probably beggared belief. Sebas brought the book over to himself and paged through it. Regretfully, Sebas did not understand the words written upon it. Or rather, it might be better to say that beings from YGGDRASIL were unable to comprehend them. Despite the bizarre principle which translated spoken language in this world, written text was not translated. However, Sebas' master had given him a magic item that could solve this problem. Sebas produced a spectacle case from his breast pocket and opened it. A pair of eyeglasses sat within. Its bridge was made of a platinum-like metal, and at a closer look, it seemed to have been inscribed with tiny characters, or some kind of textured pattern. The lenses themselves had been ground out of a crystal that resembled blue ice. By putting these glasses on, he could understand written text through the power of magic. Sebas swiftly yet carefully scanned through the pages, and then he suddenly froze. He looked away from the book, at the girl beside the youth at the counter, and gently asked, "Is something the matter?" "Ah, it's nothing." The girl blushed and lowered her face. "I just thought you looked very handsome." "Thank you very much." Sebas smiled, and the girl's face flushed even redder. Sebas, the white-haired gentleman, was a person who could mesmerize others on sight. He was good-looking, but the way he carried himself was even more striking. When he walked on the streets, 9 out of 10 women regardless of age would turn to take a second look at him. It was no wonder that the counter girls found themselves entranced by him, and it was also a common occurrence. Sebas found that understandable, and then turned his eyes back to the tome. He stopped at a certain page and asked the youth, "Could you tell me about this spell?" "Floating board, I believe it is called." "Certainly." The young man began his spiel. Floating board is a first-tier spell which creates a translucent floating platform. The size and carrying capacity of the platform varies with the caster's magical power. However, when cast from a scroll, it is limited to a surface of 1 square meter and can carry a maximum of 50 kilograms. The created board moves behind the caster, and can be a maximum of 5 meters away from him. Since the floating board can only follow behind the caster, it cannot be made to move in front of the caster. Should the caster turn around, the board will slowly move to his back. It is primarily a transportation spell and can commonly be seen during earthworks. "I see." Sebas nodded. "Then I'll take a scroll of this spell." Of course. The young man was not surprised by the fact that Sebas had selected a low-demand spell like this. After all, just about all the scrolls Sebas had purchased were for unpopular spells like this. Besides, being able to empty surplus stocks was a godsend for the Magician's Guild. "Will 1 scroll be enough?" "Yes, please." "Thank you." The youth gestured to a man sitting nearby. The man who had been listening on their conversation immediately rose to his feet and opened a door leading into a room behind the counter, which he entered. Scrolls were expensive items, and even with guards posted, it would not do to pile them up on the sales area. After about 5 minutes, the man who had left returned. In his hands was a roll of parchment. "Your scroll, sir." Sebas looked at the scroll on the counter. It was elegantly made, and looked distinctly different from the paper one could purchase outside. The name of the spell was written in black ink on the outside of the scroll, and after verifying that it was the same as the spell he wanted, he removed his glasses. "Indeed, that is it. I shall take it. Thank you for your patronage." The young man bowed politely. "As this is a first-tier spell scroll, that will be 1 gold and 10 silver coins. A potion for spells of a similar level would cost 2 gold coins, so this scroll was comparatively cheaper. That was because under normal circumstances, spell scrolls could only be used by magic casters of the same tradition. Thus, it only made sense that potions would be more expensive, given that they could be used by anyone. That said, comparatively was the key word here. 1 gold and 10 silver coins was very expensive for an average person, equivalent to about half a month's wages. However, to Sebas, or rather, his master, it was a trivial expense. Sebas then produced a pouch from safekeeping. He opened it, withdrew 11 coins, and handed them to the youth. "I have received the correct amount." The young man did not test the money's authenticity in front of Sebas. Their transactions thus far had earned Sebas that much trust. "That old man's really handsome." Debate broke out among the counter staff, especially the ladies, once Sebas had left the Magician's Guild. They were no longer wise women, but love-struck girls who had just met their Prince Charming. One of the men seated at the counter frowned and his face turned sour, but he too had felt Sebas' cultured presence and so he kept quiet. He must have had experience serving some great noble. I wouldn't be surprised if he was a noble himself, the third son of some minor lord or something. It was a common thing for noble children who could not inherit the estate to become butlers or maids. Noble families of higher rank would tend to hire more people from such backgrounds. After witnessing Sebastian's noble bearing, they could accept the fact that Sebas was high-born himself. Every little thing he does is elegant, from the way he stands to the way he moves. Everyone seated at the counter could not help but nod. If he asked me out for tea, I'd definitely accept. Me too. Me too. I'd definitely go too. The ladies squealed and cooed one after the other. They talked about where the good cafes were and then about how he would be perfect as their escort. The men looked at him from the side, and they began talking too. He looks really learned. You think he's a magic caster too? Beats me, but he might be. The spells Sebas bought had all been recently developed. That implied a broad familiarity with magic. If he had been ordered to buy a scroll, he could have simply asked the counter staff directly, with no need to browse through the catalogue. The fact that Sebas had paged through the tome was a sign that he was making the decisions on what spells to buy. This was not something any ordinary old man could do. In other words, they could surmise that he had received a specialist education in magic, that he was a magic caster. And then there's his spectacles. They look expensive. Are they a magic item? I doubt it. They should just be masterwork glasses, right? Made by the dwarves, I think. That's amazing, owning a pair of glasses like that. I'd like to see the beautiful girl he came with once, one of the men muttered. The response from beside him was a wave of disapproval. That woman's probably nothing but her looks. I felt so sorry for Sebas-san then. She was giving him the old runaround. She looks pretty, but she definitely has a terrible personality. Did you see the disgusting way she was looking at us? I feel sorry for Sebas-san, having to serve such a person. The men did not dare respond after hearing the ladies criticize a fellow female. Sebastian's mistress was a ravishing beauty, and she had stolen their hearts in an instant. The ladies beside them had also been handpicked as the face of the Magicians Guild, but comparing them to that woman was like comparing the moon to a turtle crawling around in the mud. The men wanted to tell the ladies not to be so jealous, but it was clear what would happen if they actually spoke those words out loud. None of the men was stupid enough to do that. Therefore, alright, enough chit-chat. The young man's words cut through their chatter as an adventurer approached the counter. Everyone's faces turned serious, and they set to work in earnest.